Hi, welcome to the mini lecture on essay number 2. If you've read the assignment for essay number 2, and I hope you already have, then you know that this paper is an argumentative essay that asks you to respond to this question. Is it possible to respect those with disabilities while at the same time working toward the cure or elimination of disability? This particular paper asks you to do several things. First of all, it is very important to note that it's an argumentative essay. So you are asked to advance your own opinion, but you are advancing it in relation to the other sources. And to that end, it's important to remember that this is a synthesis paper. So when you make your argument or your response to the question, you're not just simply arguing in a vacuum. You're still expected to respond to the sources. Um, and you're also being asked to think about a couple of things kind of on the side, whether or not you feel like it's respectful to those with disabilities to work toward a cure or elimination of disabilities depends on a few things. It depends on, first of all, how you think of disability. If you are persuaded that disability is more cultural than something that's physical or medical, then that will influence your answer. Something else that will affect your answer is what you mean when you think about respect. What does respect mean? What does it mean to respect somebody? And so those are important things that you'll need to decide in answering the question. There are no right ways to answer the question. There are multiple responses or approaches you can take to this paper. I'm not looking for you to say one particular thing, but let's talk about some of the approaches you could take. One approach that you could take is viewing disability culture as being diametrically opposed to the pursuit of cure. You can't respect a disability culture while making the argument that we should get rid of the people who make up that culture. So, for example, if you were thinking about deafness and you were thinking about the deaf culture, you would come down on the side of making the argument that we cannot respect deafness while we are working to eliminate deafness. Another approach you might take is looking at disability as suffering or the inconvenience or expense or pain that comes with impairment. And you might argue that treatment and cure is very respectful because it promises to eliminate that impairment and eliminate that suffering. So you notice in this approach versus the other, there's a different underlying assumption about what disability really means, and that's fine. Another approach that you can take is saying that kind of both are true, that in some instances, disability is so cultural that pursuing a cure is not respectful, but there are some categories of disabilities, such as painful or debilitating impairments or disabilities that ultimately are degenerative conditions that will lead to a person's death. And in those cases, it's not really cultural, that the disability is in fact simply impairment. So in that case, you might argue that in some instances it's okay to pursue cure, and in some instances it's not. So it is okay to make make differentiations or make your argument more complicated. One thing that I want to caution you against as you're working on this paper is not to write the abortion paper. Um, when we get into some of the readings, you will, of course, come across the concept that one way that we can eliminate disability is through selective termination, or literally the elimination of people who are going to be born with disabilities. For this particular assignment, it's not appropriate to write a paper that makes the argument that selective termination is wrong because it's abortion. That's not what we're thinking about in this paper. It's perfectly fine to say that selective termination is disrespectful of a disability culture because it's eliminating a group of people on the basis of who they are or on the basis of their identity. But this isn't this isn't an assignment where it would be appropriate for you to say that selective termination is disrespectful because it's not respecting life and it's abortion. Um, it's certainly a legitimate viewpoint to have, but it's not performing the rhetorical task that I'm asking you to do in this assignment, which is to think about the way that the way that we evaluate disability and the way that we think about disability and how that coincides with a culture that is overwhelmingly geared toward and celebratory of the pursuit of cures of various kinds of disabilities. The last thing that I want to emphasize to you is that it's okay to make some choices, not just in terms of the kind of argument you're going to make, but what you want to talk about. By the time you're writing this second paper, we're going to be looking at a variety of different kinds of scenarios or conflicts between disability identity and different kinds of elimination. So we might look at, say, we'll have looked at, of course, autism culture already, and autism is a particular condition that people are very committed to. Some people are very committed to looking to cure autism, and so you could write a paper solely focusing on the conflict or possible conflict between autism as culture and the pursuit of cure for autism. Similarly, we'll have done a considerable amount of reading on deaf culture, and so you could look at the way that technological advances perhaps threaten or provide promise for deaf culture, and you could focus your paper on that. Or you might decide that you want to focus your paper primarily on genetic conditions like Down syndrome and the issue of selective termination. And that's okay. You can make those kinds of choices. You don't have to talk about every kind of disability and every kind of cure in the paper. In fact, I would probably recommend that you not try to do so. So you'll have to think about not just the way that you're going to answer the question, but how much of the question that you're going to take on as you're moving toward the completion of this assignment. So that's it. That is the mini lecture for writing essay number 2. I'm sure that as we move forward, you have lots of questions about writing this paper. It is a tough paper to write. It's actually a more difficult paper than essay number 1. So don't feel that you're missing something if you feel lost. If you're having trouble coming to a decision about what you want to argue in the paper, we will be working through that in the next couple of weeks. And of course, as you have questions, please always, as always, ask them.